Hi, welcome to my video. Please do like and subscribe if you aren't already. So what I wanted to do today was to talk to you about the importance really of telling stories in our work, but also in the way that we describe our work and telling the story of what it's all about and why it is as it is. And so that's been prompted really for me this week because I'm preparing to give a talk at a local art club and in the northwest of the UK. And that art club is one that I've been to before. But when I went before, my work was completely different. My work was much more representational and it was illustrational. And my session was a demonstration of how I went about that work. And so this one is completely different because the focus isn't on a demonstration, although I probably will do a little bit of that. But mostly it's about talking about the approaches I take to my work and why I do what I do, and sharing that story really. And so it's really something that is sort of related to, you all know probably by now that I have a current exhibition which is called Landscape Inside Out, which has been on since March 2022 and it continues until the 4th of June 2022. And it's Gallery Oldham, and it's a joint exhibition with another artist. And my work is all about the local, in that exhibition is all about the local landscapes. And in the presentation and talk I'm going to give to the art club, I want to tell that story of the development of that work. And, you know, you can't, you know, if you're going to do that in, say, 1.5, 2 hours, then you have to be quite kind of organised. So I've been spending a bit of time thinking about how I do that. And what I want to do is just to share some snippets of those ideas, really, as a way of saying or thinking about and talking to you about the importance of us telling stories. We all have our own stories. The interesting thing about artwork is that as I develop my work, obviously it's my story, my feelings, my thinking, but what it can also do is connect with other people. As they're looking and experiencing the work, it's what those places mean to them or the connections they have, and, you know, how that inspires them or you or, you know, whoever. So it is quite an interesting kind of thing to sort of really think about. And what I wanted to share with you is, you know, if any of you are doing presentations or even if you're not, you know, it's really useful to think about what is your story and how do you tell that story in a succinct way, but a meaningful way. It's really useful if you're developing a website, if you're having a chat with somebody, if you're, you know, whatever you need to do, it's the storytelling is kind of a big part of that really in whatever guise that is. And what is interesting is that although my work now might be very different, it's much more textured, it's much more layered, it's much less representational, it's more about my feelings of places rather than literal a single representational view. The importance of place and that connection with place, my relationship with place and how that envelops my life, that hasn't really changed. It's just how I'm producing the work. So there's that kind of, that thread is the continuum really. So what I wanted to do really was to share with you, firstly, how I'm going about sharing this work and how I can talk about, you know, quite a lot of stuff and make sense of it. So how do you do that? And how have I done that? And then the other thing is, and kind of linked to that, is how do I do that given the fact that a lot of the work, not all of it, but all of the paintings, a lot of the drawings and sketchbooks are actually physically in Oldham in the gallery. How do I tell those stories? And that's been really useful actually to be able to do that without just standing in front of that work, because that in a way makes you work a little bit harder, but it makes you think as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn the camera around. Going to share with you my little Lexi here, who's asleep on the floor, having walked to the studio here, so that you can see her. I've talked quite a bit about her, and if not on here, I've certainly talked about her on my social media and shared, so you've probably seen her. So I'll give a little share of her, and then I'll talk to you about how I've thought about this this session that I have next week, and how I want to sort of break that up to tell the story, really. Okay, so as promised, here is the lovely Lexi. She's having a nice rest because we've walked here, and she had a walk before we walked here, so she's well rested, and she's enjoying lying in the bright studio, and it's quite warm in here today, and that's kind of quite nice. And she's been sunning herself in the other corner of her bed, and has now moved around. I think she's probably getting a little bit warm. So there we are. So I'm going to actually split the discussion or talk into 3 parts. So firstly, I'm going to talk about the importance of my expressive studies on location in the landscape, and the types of studies that I do to try and unpick my subject matter, and why that's so important to me. And I'm going to talk about, the studies I do in black and white with charcoal and inks, for example, these, and I'm going to show some of these. I'm going to talk about the importance of some of my colour studies and how I do those. And I'm going to talk about, in a minute, I'll go over and show you the sketchbooks that are reconfigured versions of those. And then I'm going to talk about some other types of colour studies I do that I then chop up and do different things with. And I'm going to talk about the importance of doing these small little thumbnail studies on location. And within that, I'm also going to share my sketchbooks. So this is one of my collage concertinas, and this is one of the coast path in Pembrokeshire. And there's an interesting connection with that and the actual exhibition, because although originally when we started and we put the proposal in and it was accepted, the coast was going to be part of the exhibition. Now that would have been too wide a remit, and obviously from a point of view of we were in lockdown, it wasn't going to be possible to get there, so that came out of it. But interesting now to kind of go full circle with that. So anyway, one of my concertinas there, and another of my ways of working has been my mark making, where you fold it into these booklets. And this again is one of Tenby, so again another coastal one, which I've done very recently. And if I just turn it around, you can see the cover there as well. So that's my Tenby, wrong way around. Well, that's my Tenby sketchbook. And the importance of doing these sketchbooks for me is that these approaches just help me to go into to abstract the landscape. So the collage process shakes things up a bit, as does the folding of the booklets, and I've talked about that quite a bit before, and I'll talk about that in my session. And then this is one of my reconfiguring books. So I have them for different subjects, and I'm going to share this one because I still have this one. It's not in the exhibition. This is my woodland one, and these were done on location and then ripped up and reconfigured to give better compositions, or more meaningful compositions for me. And I have a booklet of them here, so I'm going to share that. So hopefully you get an idea of the sorts of things I'm going to share. And all of this location work is obviously for a number of different reasons, including helping me to connect with the landscapes, helping me to understand more about the landscape's shapes and patterns and become more familiar with it, but also to start trying to abstract it and interpret it a little bit as well. So when I have all of the studies, I tend to surround myself, as you know, with them in the studio. And so this next stage, I'm going to talk about the studio setup and the sorts of approaches I take, not just in the paintings, because that will be in the subsequent section, but how I continue to grapple with what I'm trying to convey in the paintings, and how I do that through studies on paper and my sketchbook work, my journal work, as you can see here, and how I identify a colour palette. I have studies in here as well that are done, further studies. The colour palette work is very important to me. Writing descriptive words about the landscape is important to me. So I'm going to use this sort of second section really to talk about how it's not just about the outside work where I'm really sort of immersing myself in the landscape and then coming back and painting it. It's actually a constant going back and forth between the painting itself and studies and trying to unpick that. And some of that happens actually physically on the canvases and on the boards, but a lot of it also happens on paper, in my journal and so on. And the importance of that constant really trying to unravel what it is that you want to say about the subject. You know, because when you're out in the landscape, you're so immersed in the colours, the textures, the shapes, the feel of that place. But what in essence is it that you need to take into or want to take into your paintings, because you can't take everything in. And it's trying to sort of narrow it down in a way, and you can do that partly on the painting, but often you have to keep coming back to doing these studies, and that's why I do these very small studies. And very interestingly, some of these small studies are almost small versions of my paintings. Not that I looked at these small studies after I'd done them, they were a way of me just sort of working things out and understanding more about the marks and sort of getting my hand in with the awareness of what it was that made those places, and what gave me back the feel of those places, those textures, those you know, sort of colours, things that the evocative things, how do you take those into the work? And so I consider these studies really important, and I'm going to share quite a bit of those as my middle section of the discussion and talk, really. And I'm going to show quite a few, and hopefully people can have a good look at them. But I'm also going to demonstrate just a couple. I'm going to do some of these small studies I do just to show people how quickly they are done. And I'm also going to use some charcoal and indigo pastel to show how I sort of explore mark making without being with the subject matter, but being back in the studio. And that will be my sort of second stage, really. And hopefully once I go on to show the painting, how I develop the paintings, it will make sense. So the third and final part of the talk is going to be about sharing an overall approach I take to my work, and I'm going to have these are in different these three paintings here at different stages and on different surfaces. So the one at the front is finished, obviously, and framed. The one back right is in process, and the one back left is an earlier piece of work that is on a different sort of surface. But I'm just going to give a bit of a potted history, or a sort of story, really, of how I go through the various stages, from experimentation and play through to the ugly middle stages and out the other end. And I'm going to have some early stage pieces as well, which aren't here at the moment, just so that I can sort of share how I build up the layers and the collage and the general approaches I take, and hopefully that will give people a bit of understanding and awareness. And both for the outside work and this work in the studio, I'm going to share the materials and sorts of techniques, approaches I take, so that people get a bit of an overview. So I hope that's been helpful. I hope that's just given you some sort of insight into the sort of a way of storytelling, whether or not you're trying or grappling with your own sorts of things. It'll be interesting to hear whether you have different approaches, but I think it's important when you're giving one of these sorts of talks to have a beginning, a middle and an end. And I've just decided to chunk mine up into 3 different sections. And partly as well is because if one section just takes a lot longer, then I have a way of bringing it back and keeping things tight. Whereas if I just generally give a talk, I think it's also hard for people to follow if you just generally talk. So it's important for me, especially as I don't have a slideshow, to keep things fairly managed in terms of what I'm talking at what point in time, just so that people get a better understanding. Okay, so I hope that's been helpful, and thanks very much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. And please do like and subscribe, and as ever, comments always welcome. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.